And let's talk about fashion. And before we do, they reckon they're sweltering. Massey High School students are revolting over the school's new uniform, which bans shorts and knee-length skirts and requires students to wear ties and blazers year-round. It's not so much the uniform. I think they're quite proud of the uniform itself. But students launched an online petition on change.org calling for the Board of Trustees to bring back a summer uniform.
Yeah, fair enough.
Because Massey High's position seems to be this is just an unfortunately hot summer, so you've got to wear your blazer around between class. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's just being reasonable. It is blimmin' hot, and if the kids aren't comfortable, then they're not going to learn very well if they're sweltering in their silly blazers, in the middle of summer. I think, a little bit of common sense should prevail. I mean, back when I was at school, there was no common sense on any subject like that. But I think nowadays we could probably move ahead a bit and say, yeah, it's a bit hot over these period of months. Let them take the jackets off.
Was this an issue at Christ's College over the years, Joe? No, the wearing of blazers?
God, I'm trying to remember. There was a summer uniform, and I think when the weather was warm, there was a general decree that you could wear just shirt and shorts, as I recall.
Right.
It all seemed to work out and was reasonably sensible, yeah.
London Fashion Week is underway and 80% of the collections this year will include fur. So the fur is toxic. Protesters are out in force and getting noticed, partly because they're nearly naked. Fashion questions for both of you. Designer Roland Mouret, who made Victoria Beckham the force in fashion that she is, says a good dress can do the same job as seeing a shrink and often cost less. I reconnect women to their bodies. And my clients will often say that dress is too good for me, but it's just a dress. Have fun with it. Have fun with life. Your opinion, please, Lisa, on this advice. Can a dress really do that for you?
I think clothes can make you feel good about yourself, and they can help you feel more powerful or more strong or in control, but they certainly don't have to be designer. I know I don't buy anything above the $100 level, but I can still feel good in my outfit, So I think dressing to make you feel good. I don't believe all the advertising crap and the super designer this and the designer thing. I think that's just following trends, and I'd rather make my own way in the world. But I do think something that makes you feel good and feel appropriate, and that's a good thing, just to feel good about yourself. It's not really about what other people think about you, it's what you feel about yourself in that outfit, and I think that's a good thing.
All right, and Joe, the Telegraph's run a piece basically saying that men feel best in suits because Vogue has predicted the end of the suit, and they are holding up people like Mark Zuckerberg as proof of that. And designers are now coming out with free-form suits, whatever they are. They must be the ones the young guys do and somersaults on TV. Do you think that a man feels his best in a suit, Joe?
There is something. I mean, I virtually never wear a suit, partly because I've got so fat neither of my two suits fit anymore. But when you pull a suit on, you do feel different. That's undeniably true. It may be shameful, but it is true. And a suit that fits, you feel somehow slightly more.
Yes, that's probably a good way of you feel slightly more. Have you resisted the move towards athleisure wear?
No. No, I can only wear athleisure wear now. In that I wear elastic-waisted $10 pants from the supermarket now. I go clothes shopping where I also buy coffee and beans.
Well, Joe, come and join my coaching academy, would you?
What are you coaching? Be careful here, Lisa. My notion of live coaching is fairly on the bush lines.
That was brave of you, Lisa.
Carrying on from our conversation from the last panel, I thought I'd have a wee dig.
One of the columnists says, sniffily, ask yourself, can you imagine David Bowie in athleisure wear? No. In the battle against the dark side, members of the Rebel Alliance rock suits, which is quite a neat quote. Joe Bennett, very nice to have you on the panel again.
Thank you, Jim.
And Lisa Tamati, you too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Joe, didn't mean to be mean.
And the best of luck with your mum. Thanks, everybody. Checkpoint with John Campbell on the way.
The noise, the computers flying everywhere, the screaming, the blood. It was just, it's like walking into a zone, like a war zone.
I can't work in a building because it's just too terrifying. I've got to see sunlight. So yeah, that's affected me that way.
It's a mark of respect for the people who died, and also all of the people who gave so much on that day.
The Voices of Christchurch, 5 years on. Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. Tonight we remember those lost 5 years ago today. We were at the memorial service. We'll talk to people here about what they lost, why they're here, what they're commemorating today. We'll talk to the current mayor, former mayor, Bob Parker, describes what happened on the day itself. The Prime Minister, the wizard, guests from every part of Christchurch society over the next 90 minutes. Also tonight we are in Fiji, where the devastating cyclone has left a trail of wreckage in its path. We go there live. All of that and more coming up on this very special edition of Checkpoint. But first, here's the news with Leilani Mamoisia.
Kia ora, good evening. People are struggling to find food and water in areas devastated by Cyclone Winston in Fiji, where the death toll has doubled to 20. Our reporter Kim Baker-Wilson has arrived in Fiji on the first Air New Zealand flight since the Category 5 storm hit.
I'm in the Lovu settlement just outside of Lautoka, a collection of tin shacks that families call home. But many of those families are now displaced, and the people who remain have no power or water. The area was hit by flooding after the cyclone and is wet, muddy, with people packed tightly together in the shacks that remain. They've been asking if the government is going to help them. They say they're frightened for their future, and that's a question they still have no answer to. In Fiji, Kim Baker-Wilson.
A tourist trapped inside her hotel in Fiji as Cyclone Winston hit says she was shocked by the devastation the following morning. The first flight out of Fiji arrived in Auckland this afternoon after some had to wait overnight at Nandi Airport. Tina Tebani says she just spent a terrifying Saturday night boarded up with her family and all the other hotel guests in the hotel, listening to debris flying and wind howling. She says in the morning it was hard to take in just how much damage had been caused.
That was, devastation. That was horrible. Just lots of trees down, lots of power lines down, just lots of total sort of flattened debris, corrugated iron. Just devastation, really.
Tina Tebani says no one around her was injured. The government says the damage caused by Cyclone Winston in Fiji's outer islands may be significantly worse than originally feared. The Foreign Minister says Cyclone Winston made a direct hit on some of the outer islands and there'll be a substantial recovery operation. Murray McCulley says Fiji authorities are yet to make contact with many islands, and much of the information gathered so far has been through aerial surveillance by a New Zealand Defence Force plane. This afternoon, the government released an additional $1.8 million to support New Zealand non-governmental organisations working on the ground in Fiji. A 41-year-old man has been charged with assaulting the Earthquake Recovery Minister, Jerry Brownlee, following the 5th anniversary earthquake memorial service in Christchurch today. Mr. Brownlee had a container of brown sludge poured over him at the service. The Labour Party leader, Andrew Little, who was nearby, said it was entirely inappropriate for someone to use the memorial service to protest against the Earthquake Recovery Minister. Andrew Little says he understands some people are angry, but believes there are better ways to protest.
I'm not sure there's ever a time and a place for throwing sludgy mix over somebody's head. But in terms of making a protest, given that this was a commemorative event, we were talking about families who had lost loved ones in a city that was trashed, and to use that as a time to protest in the way that the person did, I thought was entirely inappropriate.
Andrew Little. An Auckland businessman who threatened to contaminate infant formula with 1080 has rejected the Crown's argument that he did it for money. He says, in fact, a ban on 1080 would have left him worse off financially. Jeremy Hamish Kerr has admitted 2 charges of attempted blackmail last December. At a disputed facts hearing being held ahead of his sentencing, the Crown has argued that the blackmail letters to Fonterra and Federated Farmers were motivated by financial gain. It says a government ban on 1080 would have helped sales of a rival possum control poison, Ferritox, for which Kerr received royalties. In a recorded police interview, Kerr said he isn't opposed to 1080 as such, calling it an excellent poison, but says agencies used it irresponsibly and should probably be held accountable. The New Zealand cricketers are 73 for 3 in their second innings, still needing another 62 runs to make Australia bat again in the second test in Christchurch. At the wicket a short time ago, Kane Williamson was on 31, while Brendan McCullum was yet to score. Earlier, Australia was dismissed for 505, with Neil Wagner taking 6 wickets. Meanwhile, Australia has beaten New Zealand by 8 wickets in the second women's one-dayer in Mount Maunganui. The New Zealand women's rugby sevens team has climbed to second equal in the World Series standings after their third place finish in round 2 in Sao Paulo. The New Zealanders lost 19-10 to Canada in the semi-finals and then beat the United States 28-0 in the playoff for third. Australia won their second straight tournament after beating Canada in the final. The Hurricanes coach Chris Boyd says his side is close to where he'd like them to be for the start of the Super Rugby season. After losses to the Western Force and the Blues, the Hurricanes put 70 points on the Crusaders in their final pre-season game at the weekend. Boyd says they played a lot smarter in that game.
I think we got our basic execution much more accurate. We played into a pretty strong wind in Blenheim in the first half, and I think we were up 37-7 at half time, and we only kicked the ball once. So we played a lot and we were reasonably accurate, so that was pleasing.
The Hurricanes open their Super Rugby campaign at the ACT Brumbies on Friday night, and that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Jamie Urquhart prepares to sell the fruit of a 35-year labour of love. Well, the flowers, actually. The double white trillium, or snow bunting plants he's been cultivating on his Lake Hawera property. We have a window on the word of Cornelius Drebbel, who in 1621 invented the world's first submarine. And Pierre Udier talks about what it's like to sample the soils of Antarctica in Antarctica on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And Met Service weather to midnight, Northland to Taranaki and the central high country. Fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers. Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty mainly fine. A few drizzle patches tomorrow morning. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay fine spells, isolated late afternoon or evening showers tomorrow. Whanganui to Wellington, also Wairarapa, fine today, cloudy periods tomorrow, with a few morning showers about Whanganui and Manawatu. Bulla to Fiordland, cloudy with patchy drizzle tomorrow, turning to rain in Fiordland later. The Kaikoura Coast and Canterbury areas of cloud, with a few showers tomorrow, clearing from the south in the afternoon. In the remaining South Island areas, mostly fine weather, a few showers developing about coastal Southland tomorrow evening. Chatham Islands, a few showers developing tomorrow evening. And it's 5:08.
Thank you, Leilani. See you at 5:30 for the latest headlines. The devastation of entire communities in Fiji in a few minutes. Our reporter Kim Baker-Wilson is there as the death toll climbs to 20 and almost certainly beyond that. But we begin in Christchurch, where a service to mark the 5th anniversary of the shallow, sharp 6.3 earthquake that struck on this day in 2011 was held this afternoon. More than 1,000 people gathered at the city's Botanic Gardens to remember the 185 lives that were lost. 115 people perished in the CTV building, 18 died in the Pine Gould building, and 8 lives were lost in a bus on Colombo Street hit by falling masonry. Another 40 people died in other places throughout the city, and more than 6,000 people were treated for injuries. Tonight, the voices of people who came to the service today. Some were there to support the city they love so much, but most were there because 5 years ago today their lives changed in profound and terrible ways. Like Gail, who told me she was working inside the AMI building in Latimer Square when the earthquake struck.
The noise, the computers flying everywhere, the screaming, the blood. It was just It's like walking into a zone, like a war zone.
5 years is not long enough to get that out of your system, is it?
No, not really.
So you left Christchurch. You left Christchurch, did you?
I left Christchurch and went to the other side of the world. And I come home with my baby and my partner.
Your baby is beautiful.
Thank you.
And isn't she an apt little symbol for the day, a sense of a new Christchurch and a future after the earthquake and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah.
Did you come home to be here for today, or was it just a coincidence?
It was just a coincidence that we were here for the memorial, and then Mum was like, let's go and have a look today. So, yeah.
You reckon you can handle it?
Yeah. It's just good.
No, I know what you mean.
Yeah. Sort of like you say, you remember these things when you come out, like the smell of the dust and everything when you get out of the building. So, and it is like, you see it on TV in those movies and you think, yeah, that's exactly it. People are helping each other and trying to, get everybody out of town and stuff. So everybody pulled together. It was good to see on the day.
And they still do now.
Yeah,
it's been one of the defining things of the city for me, the way people have been so kind and committed and caring about each other.
Yeah, so it's good. It's good to come home and see that still happening.
That was Gail. They're complete strangers, but Nick was working not far from Gail, a very short distance away, also in Latimer Square, just across the road from the CTV building there, of course, when the quake hit. He told me why he'd come to today's memorial service.
5 years has passed. I came to the first two services and I thought it was time to maybe try and let go, but I think enough time's passed now. But with these recent earthquakes that have happened this year, that kind of brings it all back, and it's even more prescient to be here this morning.
Did you lose anyone or anything in the February quake 5 years ago today?
Friends of mine did. My two children had very narrow escapes. And I myself had a pretty close shave in a building off Latimer Square, so it was quite horrendous.
It's funny, isn't it? You think, theoretically, 5 years is enough time to be able to cope with it, but people still feel the weight incredibly heavily, don't they?
They do. I mean, the poor people whose insurance claims are still open-ended, that's awful. But people who've lost somebody, I mean, I don't think time will ever heal that.
What are you hoping for today, Nick?
I think it's just a time of quiet reflection. It's a bit like going to church. You hopefully feel a bit better when you come out the other end. And but it's a mark of respect for the people who died, and also all of the people who gave so much on that day at that time.
Nick, who was in Latimer Square 5 years ago today. Summer Oliver was working as an administrator for the Perpetual Trust on the first floor of the PGC building when the quake hit. She was pinned beneath a concrete beam for 4 hours as rescuers worked desperately to free her. Ms. Oliver lost 10 workmates, whilst 2 had both legs amputated.
I was injured in the PGC building.
And how's the recovery been?
Pretty tough, yeah. I was crushed under a beam, so just been a long recovery, healing and learning to walk again, and lots of physio operation, and yeah, here we are 5 years on.
Does it feel like 5 years?
Not really. I can still remember quite a lot as if it was yesterday. Yeah.
And what did the recent earthquake, what was the psychological impact of that upon you? Were you able to cope with it?
I felt all right, but actually it was everyone around me that seemed to be struggling the most, and then it kind of hit me again. I mean, on the day I was stuck in a building and couldn't see anything, so yeah, seemed to affect a lot of my friends and family more. Just remembering all the chaos and all the craziness and the sirens, and yeah.
What are you hoping for today?
I don't really know what to expect today. Just, yeah, remember and catch up with people I used to work with and friends and family, and just be together.
Summer, who was trapped in the rubble of the Pine Gould building on this day 5 years ago. Anita's husband Andrew worked at the CTV building, in the CTV building for CTV, one of 115 people who lost their lives in a structure the Royal Commission later described as so deficient it should never have been built. Anita left Christchurch after the quakes but came back for the memorial today.
A little bit shaky, I haven't been back I've come back a year ago now, but the earthquakes the other day sort of made me feel a bit like I didn't want to come back today, but it's a big day, so got to be here.
Did you leave because it was too sad to be here, or did you leave to start your life again?
Both. Pretty much both. It's not somewhere I wanted to be anymore, but there's other things out there, other horizons to find, so.
Just because of the reminders?
Pretty much, yeah, reminders and, yeah, just stress, yeah.
So your husband was an editor and cameraman for CTV and he was in the building when it collapsed?
Yeah, he was, but yeah, it's a sad day.
It's a really sad day. It's funny because people now are talking about the future and the possibility that hangs over Christchurch.
Huge.
It's huge. I mean, they're going to make an amazing city here, but today feels heavy with the past, doesn't it?
It does at the moment, but I think today could be the turning point where everyone it's 5 years on now and everyone it's time to move forward for a lot of people. I think I have never been to one of these memorial services. I've never been able to bring myself to come to one, so I think this is my time to move on and, yeah, just carry on.
What was your husband's name?
Andrew Bishop.
I've heard of Andrew. I think everyone in the business has heard of Andrew.
Everybody knows Andrew. He was a good guy. Had some lovely people in his life.
We're talking to the people who were at the memorial service today on Checkpoint. The quake changed so many lives forever, of course. Karen Dodd was forced to leave her employment after the quake.
Work in a building because it's just too terrifying. I've got to see sunlight. So yeah, it's affected me that way.
Where were you on this day 5 years ago?
St George Hospital, working in the laundry.
And what happened?
Oh my gosh, we couldn't get out. We were stuck inside and all the trolleys moved and all the linen moved and we all freaked. It was horrible. We couldn't get out. Yeah, there's only 2 doors in and out and they're just normal doors. And the chapel fell on one door and the other door, the linen trolleys covered it. So we were stuck in there for a while.
And 5 years on, you still can't work inside?
No, so I went to do motel work. Not in buildings, yeah. I can't work in tall buildings. Yeah, and I'm a room attendant by trade. I can't go back to hotels or anything. It's too scary.
We'll have more of the Voices of Christchurch later in the programme. The Governor-General, Sir Jerry Mataparai, was among the speakers at today's service, along with current Mayor Leanne Dalzell. All 185 names of those who died were read out and a minute's silence was observed at 12:51, throughout the city, in fact. As he arrived, the Prime Minister, John Key, told me what the 5th anniversary means to him.
It's always going to be a moment of reflection, and I mean 5 years is a long time, but if you've gone through the pain and suffering that some people have gone through, losing loved ones, losing their business, losing their home, it's still quite raw, I think. On the other side of the coin, it's a sort of moment of optimism as people look forward, and they can see the progress sort of everywhere. You can see the buildings, you can see lots of things springing up, and I mean, I gave a speech down here last week, actually, the week before last. That was just a function. And I just said, it's good momentum happening in Christchurch now, things are looking a lot better. And the crowd, who were all Cantabrians, broke into spontaneous applause. So I think there is a sort of feeling that you're getting there, but not to take away from the many issues.
Prime Minister John Key just arriving at the memorial service this afternoon. Checkpoint invited Earthquake Recovery Minister Jerry Brownlee onto the programme this evening, but he declined. Mr Brownlee earlier had a container of, quote, brown sludge poured over him at the memorial service. A 41-year-old man has been charged with assaulting him. Coming up next on Checkpoint, the death toll in Fiji after Cyclone Winston rises to 20. And that's before officials have reached the many outer islands, and why tens of thousands of workers might be missing millions in total from the KiwiSavers accounts. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. Your reflections on Christchurch 5 years on, so welcome. Fiji too, of course. Text 2101. Email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Our Facebook and Twitter address is checkpointrnz. The time is 20 minutes past 5 on Checkpoint. We'll return to the earthquake shortly, but we head now to Fiji, where people in some of the villages worst hit by Cyclone Winston still haven't been contacted, and aid agencies are getting more and more worried for their safety. Many outlying islands, of course. The storm is the most powerful in Fiji's recorded history and has flattened villages and devastated crops. The death toll now stands at 20. But aid agencies worry that could climb when they reach those isolated outer islands. Our reporter Kim Baker-Wilson has arrived in Lautoka, 24 kilometres north of Nandi.
Well, straight after we got here, I came to the Lovu settlement. It's an informal settlement, so to the people here, they're houses, but you and I would call them tin shacks, and it's just out of the Lautoka town. People have described just how ferocious Cyclone Winston was. They say it was the worst storm they've ever endured, most certainly. But that wasn't the end of it for them. After Cyclone Winston came the floodwaters, and for some people here, those floodwaters rose up to the windows of those tin shacks that they live in. Some of them just aren't here anymore. Others can't be lived in at all, and there's real fears now from the people here about just what they're going to do over the next coming days and over the next coming weeks. The reason for that is they have no power, they have very little food. Of big concern for them is the water. There's no water coming here at the moment. People are having to walk some distance to get buckets of water and take it back home. I've been to one of those homes where there's a family of 7 or so, one of them an 8-month-old baby who endured Cyclone Winston, endured the floodwaters that came afterwards, and now having to endure no food, no water.
Gosh, what was the scene like as you drove from the airport through, leaving the more sort of conventional concrete infrastructure? What kind of damage did you see on the way there?
Well, driving along the main road here, there's certainly a lot of trees down, and at times you do have to slow down to get around those trees, but you have to say they've done a very good job so far to get trees off the road so people can move around. Of course, the curfew that was in place here has only just recently been lifted, so people are able to move around. But once you get off those tar-sealed roads and onto the gravel roads, that's when you start getting into difficulties. And in fact, the four-wheel drive that was in front of us before got stuck and had to manoeuvre its way out of the mud and the water that it was in. And that's the common theme in this informal settlement that I'm now in. We're walking through mud, we're walking through water, and that's what people are living around and in at the moment.
So, Kim, the poorest communities have suffered the most damage.
They have, and they're already starting to ask the questions and ask us as reporters, is the government coming? Is the government coming to help us? And at the moment, we don't have those answers to give them. So they're going about their lives as best as they can. They're going to get coconuts to get food from, and they're going to get that essential water about 10 minutes walk away. They tell me is the nearest water supply, that they're going and actually carrying buckets there and bringing those heavy buckets back to give to their families.
Kim Baker-Wilson. UNICEF's communications specialist for the Pacific is Alice Clements. Alice was in Port Vila in Vanuatu and spent the night in the eye of the devastating Cyclone Pam when it hit there last year. She is now on the other side of Viti Levu in the capital Suva, and while I was in Christchurch this afternoon, she spoke to our reporter Alex Ashton via Skype video.
Viti Levu is home to 70% of the population for Fiji, and there are still some areas that are inaccessible by telecommunications and also by road.
Has aid actually started going out yet?
I'm pleased to confirm that it has. This afternoon there are 2 boats going to Overlau and to Koru Islands. The Ministry of Education is leading that mission, and UNICEF supplies for health, education and water, sanitation and hygiene are on those boats.
So that was just this afternoon that the government gave you the okay to start doing that?
The government requested international assistance from heads of diplomatic missions and UN agencies today, from the international community overall, and a specific request was made to UNICEF for assistance. We've worked with the government here for a very long time. We work very well together. We have materials pre-positioned here ready to go. Our warehouse is now working with volunteers and staff around the clock to get all those shipped and ready to go and packed. So we're ready. The government here is moving incredibly quickly. All of, you wouldn't have recognised Suva yesterday. There was debris and trees and power lines literally everywhere. The government imposed a 24-hour curfew, which was extremely sensible. It allowed them to get rid of those live power lines and clear trees that were in the roads. And this morning, what are we talking? Less than 48 hours later, after the cyclone, the government is ready for action. Relief supplies are going to areas that the New Zealand Defence Force Orion aerial survey yesterday identified as being priorities. There's some communities that we've seen photos from this surveillance mission yesterday, and looking down at these communities, there should be a village and there is just debris. There is where there should be a house, you're seeing a concrete pad with debris around it. It's deeply distressing imagery to have a look at, and these are from areas that we still don't have any telecommunications with, so we simply don't know if this confirmed death toll of 17 is going to rise. All expectations are that it will.
In terms of the devastation, not the response as such, how does it compare though to Pam?
I can't personally compare it for you right now because in Vanuatu I was under the eye of the cyclone in Port Vila, which was frankly the scariest experience of my life, which I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. In terms of what the experience was here, we had a pretty awful night as well, but it was a night where the destruction that was revealed the next morning, some roofs had lifted, huge trees had fallen over, telephone poles had fallen over. Telephone poles had these fireworks from trees thrashing against them because of the wind. But we are still considering ourselves lucky. Those who were under what was definitely Fiji's strongest ever cyclone, and possibly the Southern Hemisphere's strongest ever cyclone, will not have been so lucky. The situation here is that we've pre-positioned emergency supplies. We're ready to go immediately and get aid to those who need it most. Today, those two boats will be taking medical and emergency and supplies, a wide variety of supplies, education supplies for kids whose schools have been destroyed, whose education has been interrupted. We know that even though it seems counterintuitive in an emergency, getting kids back into school quickly, even if that school is a tent, is the best way to help them recover emotionally. It's the best way to keep them safe when their parents are focusing on the cleanup and the recovery process. It also helps them, of course, to continue with their education. But we also have, in addition to medical supplies, we have water, sanitation and hygiene supplies, which will help to prevent the spread of disease outbreaks, which is a real risk after a situation such as this.
Do you have any worries now or concerns that aid started to go out about how it goes from here?
At this point in time, obviously we have pre-positioned materials, but they're not sufficient for the scale of the destruction that's being revealed day by day. We're seeing, from what we're seeing from the areas that we have been able to access and the government has been able to access, the destruction is awful, and we just know that there are so many more areas waiting to hit, waiting to reveal themselves in terms of destruction. So we have immediate response materials. We have the logistics infrastructure that we need to get them here. Logistically, to get to outer islands, it's very difficult, but the Fiji government is very organised in this respect, and they will be able to ship materials where they're needed most. But what we now need is money, I'm afraid. This is an incredibly expensive process logistically to get materials from overseas through to Fiji, and to get these materials out to those outer islands, especially who are going to need the most help.
It was Alice Clements from UNICEF talking to Alex Ashton. We will go back to Fiji later in the program. It's 28 and a half minutes past 5. While we're getting through lots of subjects, we should say Brendan McCullum has finished his career as a batsman in Test cricket. Anyway, he was just out for 25, his final ever innings batting for the Black Caps in Test cricket. And New Zealand are about 105 for 4. Right, let's move on and change subject entirely. News that tens of thousands of workers are missing millions of dollars from their KiwiSaver accounts today because their employers, that's a total of millions of dollars of course, because their employers have failed to either pass on payments docked from their pay or pay their own employer contributions. Figures obtained by RNZ News show Inland Revenue is chasing thousands of employers who owe in total more than $25 million in outstanding payments built up since the retirement savings scheme began, and they owe a further $4 million in penalties. Anusha Bradley reports.
Since KiwiSaver's inception in 2007, more than 1,600 employers have failed to provide inland revenue with $15 million that they've deducted from their employees' own salaries. While workers will eventually receive that money one way or another because it falls under a government guarantee, there's a further $10.6 million of employer contributions companies haven't paid that aren't guaranteed. Most of the debt is owed by small businesses who employ fewer than 5 staff. Inland Revenue's collection manager David Udy says the department's doing all it can to collect the debt, and it's making progress.
The total amount of debt outstanding as at 30 June was down $4 million on the previous year. So as I say, it has priority with us. However, one needs to realise there's many reasons employers get into difficulty, and obviously if the business doesn't have funds, well then we're unable to obtain those.
David Udy says some of the employers that owe money are repeat offenders, but he can't say how many. He says slow-paying employers are notified of any missed payments within a month, and the department tries to work with them to recover the money. He says legal action is only used as a last resort. But a tax consultant, Terry Boucher, says Inland Revenue is often too slow to act, and it needs to do more to educate small businesses about their obligations.
There's a lot of employers and people slip through the cracks. We have seen instances where it seems like 5 or 6 years have passed without Inland Revenue taking any action. Now, the debt is piling up at all this time with the penalties and interest, but active steps to collect it do not appear to have been taken soon enough.
Employers' contributions are not guaranteed by the government. Labour's finance spokesperson Grant Robertson says that might need to change.
I am prepared to look at the idea of a guarantee because I think the workers who enrol in KiwiSaver deserve to know that they'll get all the benefits of having been part of the scheme when they retire. But for me, that's a step down the line after we work out whether or not Inland Revenue is actually performing the role that it should here in chasing down these employers who are effectively breaching their obligations under the KiwiSaver Act.
Inland Revenue says any workers who are missing KiwiSaver payments should first talk to their employer or contact them for advice. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
28 minutes to 6 on Checkpoint. Coming up in the next hour, we return to Christchurch, we return to Fiji, we talk sport, the Black Caps struggling a little bit, lots coming up. But first, news headlines with Leilani Mamoisia.
The death toll from Cyclone Winston in Fiji has increased to 20. The country's National Disaster Management Office says 10 of those were killed in the Western Division, the worst hit part of Viti Levu. 7 fishermen from the Yasawas are also missing at sea. Communications across much of Fiji remain down, and it is feared the toll will rise further. People are struggling to find food and water in the worst affected areas. The government here is giving an additional $1.8 million to support New Zealand non-governmental organisations working on the ground in Fiji. Met Service says there's a chance Cyclone Winston could reach New Zealand later this week, but it would be weak by then. A 41-year-old man has been charged with assaulting the Earthquake Recovery Minister Jerry Brownlee following the 5th anniversary earthquake memorial service in Christchurch today. A container of brown sludge was poured over Mr Brownlee. More than 1,000 people were at the public service in Christchurch's Botanic Gardens. An Auckland businessman who threatened to contaminate infant formula with 1080 has rejected the Crown's argument that he did it for money. He says, in fact, a ban on 1080 would have left him worse off financially. Jeremy Hamish Kerr has admitted 2 charges of attempted blackmail last December. A magnitude 5 earthquake hit near the Marlborough town of Seddon just after 4 this afternoon. GeoNet says it was 8 kilometres deep and about 30 kilometres southeast of the town. The Whittaker's chocolate factory in Porirua has had to be evacuated because of a gas leak. The fire service says crews have now left the scene and the main's been fixed. The Black Caps captain Brendan McCullum has scored 25 in his last bat for New Zealand. With his dismissal, New Zealand were 105 for 4 a short time ago in their second innings late on day 3 of the second test against Australia in Christchurch. They trail Australia by 30 runs. McCullum will retire from international cricket after this game. and it's 26 to 6.
Thank you, Leilani. Well, let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier, who is sitting beside me in the studio. And we've had a few notable companies reporting their results today. Nona, which ones have you been looking at?
Well, today we had Freightways, and we had Kiwi Bank, and we had New Zealand Post, and we had Ports of Auckland. But I guess the one that's kind of interesting, I think, would be Freightways. One, because it's a barometer of how the New Zealand economy is going.
Okay, how did they go?
Well, actually, they went pretty well. Except, well, it was a mixed result. First of all, it was a record result. I just want to say that up front. The company is in good health. But they issued a caution. They said that their express business, Courier Express business, had a flat revenue result. Their growth was on the back of their information management business, which is great. But they're cautious. They're saying that global economic conditions, weak dairy prices have caused some concern because they're a business to business. That's how they make most of their money. And they're a barometer of how things are going in the New Zealand economy. And so if they're saying, hey, caution ahead for at least this year, then that makes the market take notice, or at least it should. And so then we had, of course, some other results. Kiwi Bank.
Can we talk about Kiwi Bank and NZ Post?
Yeah, well, actually, it's funny. New Zealand Post, of course, is the parent of Kiwi Bank, and pretty much most of its profit is as a result of Kiwi Bank.
Do they report together or separately?
Well, they report at the same, sort of roughly the same time, but they report separately. So Kiwi Bank had a marginal increase in their first half profit, but had, incredibly, they have an extra 40,000 rise in customers. Wow. So a lot of people are obviously liking the Kiwi Bank. Yeah. And even though they had a marginal increase in their first half profit, they're concerned about a slowing economy, they still think that they're going to meet or beat their full year profit forecast. So that's quite good. NZ Post, interesting. Of course, their their result reflects Kiwi Bank. But interestingly, the chief executive said that, and I thought this was interesting, letter volumes have fallen by 60 million items in the past year.
Moly.
60 million. I guess you're not mailing your friends and family.
Yeah, it's that simple, isn't it?
And they say actually that is costing them between $20 and $30 million a year. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, fascinating. What are the overall market scores?
Well, now the market was actually a little changed. It was down just 2 points. So that's 6,139 is where we ended the day. And the volume was reasonable. Dollar is trading at 66.5 US cents and 92.7 Australian.
Slight slip on the dollar there.
No, actually, it's about the same as, against the Aussie. Yeah, you're right. Oh, yes, that's true. Yeah. Against the US, it seems stuck, doesn't it?
Thanks, Nona Peltier, our senior business reporter here in Auckland. Let's leave Auckland and return to Christchurch. More than 1,000 people gathered today at the Christchurch Botanic Gardens to remember the 185 lives lost on this day, February 22nd, 2011. Among them, Alex Svetanov. Among the most enduring memories of the quake is Alec walking atop the rubble of the CTV building in the hours after its collapse. Anyone who saw that picture will never forget it. Alec's wife Tamara, a Serbian paediatrician, was studying English in the CTV building. For 12 hours she was alive, and she talked with Alec on her cell phone, but she passed away before she could be rescued.
This is a sad day to remind ourselves on the disaster on the day, and every family that lost somebody to mourn.
The 5 years has flown by, hasn't it? Has it passed very fast for you?
Very fast, quickly. I look at that through the kids. They were 8 and 10 years at the quake. Now, teenagers of 15 and 13, and this day reminds you how quick time gone. And just like yesterday, pictures are coming of the morning when we left home to bring them to school, and then that was the last time to see Mum.
Your boy turned 15 over the weekend.
Yesterday was his birthday.
And how's he going?
Good. He's all right.
Doing well at school?
Oh, hell. He's between the few best students in the classroom and in entire generation, entire year 9, 10. He just started year 11.
Good boy. His mum would be very proud of him.
She will be proud of him. And daughter as well. She's good too. She just turned to year 9 at high school.
Did you ever think of leaving Christchurch? Because all the reminders are here. Everywhere you go is somewhere you went as a family. Every time you go anywhere near the site of the CTV building, it is such a powerful reminder.
Correct. I was thinking at one stage to leave, but then we decided to stay. It's hard, but you have to live with this. There are more memories that are connecting us with Christchurch and good things than bad things. So here we are. We changed the house. House goes with my wife. It was hard for us to leave and just move to another place. And it's hard to go to city center still for all of us. You just remind yourself on the disaster, on the tragedy, on everyone was affected.
Everyone was affected. I really feel that today. I really feel that
entire town is. I got text messages.
What are you hoping for today?
Just to remember, just to remind ourselves and learn some lessons, especially for the government services. I mean, all New Zealand, even my pictures went all around the globe, trying to save her and other people. There were 6 or 8 other ladies trapped in one little tunnel underneath. I was on the phone with her. When I heard she's alive, my picture in front of the eyes was we are having her on the stretchers and going to hospital, but they turned the other way around. So instead alive, she was alive, good, confirmed at the inquiry 12 hours after the quake. Not only by my phone, by the phone the official registered and the voice was played, and unfortunately we couldn't rescue them. Yeah.
I hope today goes as well as it possibly can, Alec. Your dignity.
Oh, it will go. I mean, emotions are emotions. Life is life. Everyday life is everyday life, and you have to live with this. So you see my eyes getting wet a bit, but you swallow and carry on. Otherwise, you go broken.
Alex Svetanov, husband of Tamara, who died in the Christchurch quake in the rubble of the CTV building in the hours after it collapsed. It wasn't just lives that were lost, of course. On February 22nd, 2011, communities were lost too. Tilly is one of thousands of Christchurch residents who lost their homes.
I'm here to be with everybody else in solidarity in Christchurch for what we've all experienced in the last 5 years, and it's a significant marking point. I think we are gathering some energy, and my house is going to be knocked over shortly.
5 years on, your house is going to be knocked over.
Yes, it is. It's a multi-unit, so it's one of the last to be sorted out.
And what have you been doing in the interim for the past 5 years? Just waiting?
Yes, I got out of my house on the 22nd of February. I went with my children and lived at Governor's Bay in a one-bedroom sleep out for 6 months. Then I went to the red zone and lived there for 2.5 years. And the failure of the insurance company and EQC to do anything about my damaged house meant I had to go back there. So we've been living back there for 2.5 years, and then they've decided it's a rebuild, so we're shifting out very shortly and it will be demolished. So by the time I get back home again at the end of next year, my children and I will have been out of our home for a total of 4 years.
Tilly. A familiar sight in Christchurch over the past 40 years is the pointy hat and black gown and beard of the wizard. I asked him what the past 5 years have meant for him.
Incredible disbelief at the cruelty and stupidity and incompetence of the authorities, City Council, CERA, EQC, government, the whole lot. I just can't believe the inhumanity of the bloody thing. It's been so cruel. People have been so hurt. Now, latest thing. Big meeting yesterday in the square, big rally. They all put on the chalk how they felt about the terrible disaster we're living in all these years. All people have died from strain. They wrote little things. Finally, some action. The council sent in a whole lot of trucks to clean every bit of graffiti off the square within a few hours. So they could do one thing. They can bring trucks of men down to clean off the graffiti, saying how they felt. They couldn't even let the signs of pain be seen.
The wizard. We did want to talk about some of the issues that he canvassed briefly there with Earthquake Recovery Minister Jerry Brownlee. He declined our invitation for an interview. A 41-year-old man has been charged with assaulting him with some brown sludge. So the wizard sensing the inhumanity of the management. Liz and Keith have a more positive story. They weren't in Christchurch for the February quake, but their damaged home has been rebuilt.
I've come just to remember, just for people and just to support people really, and the fact that I live here, I love Christchurch. Basically that's it.
Keith?
Yeah, the same kind of thing. We weren't here for the February earthquake, so it's good to come back and remember. We most probably knew more about what was happening from Adelaide than people here did. It was a terrible feeling being away, but knowing we couldn't do anything, but it still affected us and a lot of the Kiwis across in Adelaide at the time, Christchurch people. So it was quite a shocking time really for all of us across there. And so, like Liz said, we've got the day off, so we thought we'd make the most of it and come down and see the service.
What happened to your home? What happened to your home here?
Well, the home wasn't badly damaged, but the ground was. We had about a foot or 300 mils of liquefaction all the way around our house, outside, luckily. And so the house could have been repaired, but because of the land and because it was an old house, then it was demolished and rebuilt.
And so you have moved on. You have been demolished and rebuilt.
We have, yes. We've been in our house for a year.
And what does that feel like?
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah. It's still home because it's in the same place, but it's a lovely house, and we really appreciate what everyone's done for us to be able to get into that house.
Liz and Keith, amongst the enduring images of the hours and days and weeks after the earthquake were the volunteers, volunteer firefighters, volunteer ambulance workers, people, urban search and rescue people who were just in the rubble and working so hard. And today was an important day for those people. Richard worked, he's both a volunteer firefighter and ambulance driver, and he worked in Christchurch, in the city, in the days after the quake.
In the aftermath, as a volunteer ambulance officer, came up here and did what I could more in the support for the community. You could see that there was still suffering. This is going on the weeks following on. So my respect comes to those that actually came up here and served those immediate 24 hours, 48 hours. They're the ones that give me the tingly feelings to actually be here and represent. Nice to acquaint with some of the fire brigade people here today as well, that they know the people that came up from Timaru, and we also know what they did. It's a great salvation of their volunteer time, really. So,
what did we learn about our character as a group of people in those days and hours after the earthquake?
Probably that we can, a part in Canterbury, the CAN of it is we can help. Canterbury is about getting together, so resilience is what we're about now, and the fellowship and the integrity that goes with that fellowship is about who we are now. Why do we come here? Because of the tradition of the boundaries that were made years ago, the distinguished areas of Christchurch for what it is, the Garden City, but also that special part of who we are as a people, as our culture. So, we're always going to come here with our children and maybe visitors, like I've got at the moment from Korea, and pay our respect to those that did suffer today, but also the significance of that heritage that's been here for a long time. So it's beautiful. It's a great place to visit, and we will continue to bring people here.
11.5 minutes to 6 on Checkpoint. That was Richard, one of the many volunteers who did such good work in Christchurch 5 years ago today, and in the days and weeks after that terrible day. Let's change the subject entirely, although we're still staying in the Christchurch area, and go to the cricket. New Zealand batsman Brendan McCullum has ended his international cricket career as a batsman anyway, with a final knock of 25 on the third day of the second test against Australia in Christchurch. The Black Caps are still trailing Australia in the match, despite bowler Neil Wagner ripping through the Australian batting order, getting at that tail, ending the first innings with 6 for 106, career best in Test cricket for him. Our sports editor Stephen Hewson joins us now from Hagley Oval. Stephen, let's ask you a very simple question. What's the latest score? Where are we at?
115 for 4, John, still trailing 20 or so runs from making Australia bat again. So, yeah, a wee bit gloomy, just like the day has become here, because it's been very sort of overcast most of the day. The sun burst through a few times, but, it's got rather chilly.
Yeah, an apt sort of day, I think, in the circumstances of the anniversary. Were you there for the minute's silence? That must have been very moving.
Yes, it was. I mean, obviously both teams too wore black armbands in remembrance of the quake 5 years ago, and as you mentioned, the minute silence at 12:51 during the lunch break. So yeah, there's been a very strong and vocal crowd here today. I mean, there would have been close to 3,000 people, which is pretty good, given we had two full houses on the opening 2 days, Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see those sorts of crowds turn out for Test cricket. Let's talk about Brendan McCullum's final knock. Of course, that wonderful fastest Test century in history in the first innings. Couldn't quite match it. Well, didn't even come close to matching it with 25 in the second. How was he farewelled from the ground as he walked off, Stephen?
We got a standing ovation as he left the ground. He got a standing ovation as he came onto the ground. No guard of honour this time from the Australians, though. They gave him one coming when he came to the crease on that opening day. I suppose after scoring that 145, of course, the century coming off just 54 balls, there was no way. Well, yeah, how could he come up and sort of repeat that? I suppose everyone was hoping for that, given the state of the game. He came out and he was aggressive as he was on that first day, but had a 6 and a couple of 4s, but wasn't quite able to go on from 25. I suppose the last two innings we've seen him play in his Test career sum up the way that he plays the game. He lives by the sword, dies by the sword. He has that philosophy that attack is the best form of defence, and he hasn't changed that throughout his career.
Yes, and he's done remarkably well with that philosophy. One final question about Neil Wagner. Look, I haven't seen any of this today because I was at the memorial and coming and going, but 6 for 106. What was he doing with the ball?
He was bowling short and at leg stump, and 4 of those dismissals were caught at square leg. So the Black Caps obviously decided that some of the Australian batsmen had a weakness against that short ball. Some might say it's quite defensive cricket, but it obviously worked to a degree for the Black Caps, of course, because they ended up 135 runs behind on the first innings. But he toiled away, Neil Wagner, as he does, came up with a strategy that they thought would work for the Australian batsmen. He kept bowling hard and short at them on that leg stump, and the Australian batsmen struggled with the pull shot, not being able to keep it down. And all 6 wickets came off short balls. The other 2 were caught behind the wicket. But interesting tactics, and his career best figures, 6 for 106.
Thanks, Stephen Hewson. New Zealand still working to make Australia bat again. We will, of course, when I say we, I apologise to Australian listeners. New Zealand will, of course, do that. But the issue is, what sort of target will New Zealand, the Black Caps, be able to set for Australia? It's 7.5 minutes to 6. An Auckland businessman who threatened to contaminate infant formula with 1080 has rejected the Crown's argument that he did so for money. It was revealed today that the businessman who admitted the 2 charges of attempted blackmail last December is 60-year-old Jeremy Hamish Kerr. The threat, which the police only publicised 5 months after the letters were sent to dairy giant Fonterra and Federated Farmers in November 2014, led to infant formula being pulled off supermarket shelves. I'm sure everyone remembers that. Our reporter Carla Penman went along to a disputed facts hearing today. Obviously, Kerr has admitted it at the High Court in Auckland and joins us now. Carla, why do the Crown think Kerr did it?
Well, the Crown argued that at the time Kerr was in financial difficulty as the wider market for possum bait was in decline, and that was affecting his business. Now, he invented a cyanide-based pesticide in 1993 called Ferritox, and then as well as today, the Crown did repeatedly refer to a belief that Kerr had nothing against 1080 itself, so that wasn't the case here. And there were also 12 witness statements read out, and of those was Robert Holmes, who worked in the pest control industry, said that if 1080 was banned, it would mean that products such as Ferritox would increase in demand. And Graham Wright, who also spent 10 years at the firm working under Kerr, making Ferritox, worked out that a ban could lift Ferritox's demand by 10 to 30%.
Right, so the police very explicitly suggesting it was for Kerr's financial gain. What did the police interview play in court reveal?
Well, Kerr is seen in a video telling the detective that he was making $100,000 a year since 1993 when he did develop this product. But he did say since then it had dropped off. He said there'd been a $70,000 turnover in 2014, and he said that he described his Ferrotox sort of business side of things as an average business and a hobby type thing. But we also found out in the interview that he denied Ferrotox rivaling 1080, saying that they were quite different products.
Right.
And he also sort of said as well that 1080, he wasn't strictly against it, but he believed it was an excellent poison, but it was being used irresponsibly by agencies, and that those people should be held to account.
We should say he's admitted the charge. This is a disputed facts hearing, right? The hearing will continue tomorrow, then a sentencing date will be sent. Charges carry a maximum of what?
Maximum of 3 years.
Okay.
So I guess it will be seen how Kerr is dealt with, but I think it's important to note that he had rippling effects. And then also in that police interview, he did say that those threats, he realised that they would be devastating to the economy and really hurt New Zealand in a number of ways.
Carla Penman, thank you. Who was in court today? Carla Penman, thanks very much indeed. Carla, 5 minutes to 6. Religious groups have teamed up to provide a warm welcome to the first 90 Syrian refugees who'll settle in Wellington over the next fortnight. Anglican and Catholic churches, along with the New Zealand Islamic Centre, are kitting out 25 homes this week with pantry, staples, kitchenware, bedding and other essential items. Michael Kropp went to the Anglican Cathedral and met with some of those volunteering to do this work.
Today we're going through each individual household of the 25, checking off the goods, quality checking the goods, making sure that they have what they need for the number of people that will be in that house.
A Wellington vicar, Jenny Sim, is busy checking off the pots and pans, blankets, ironing board and pantry items for house number 12. It will soon be the home for a family of 5, a mum, dad, 2 boys and a girl who've fled civil war in Syria.
People are really, really happy to welcome and embrace these new families and give them a foot up for a new start. So I just think it's a great cause, great way of expressing God's love to these people and saying welcome.
Around the corner, Mike Keenan is testing second-hand electrical goods.
We're just making sure that the donated goods that aren't brand new are electrically tested. So we try them out to make sure they work. And really the key is for 3-pin plug stuff. You're testing for earthing, make sure people don't get electrocuted. That's the whole thing. And the other part of the test is to make sure the thing's operational.
In September last year, the Anglican and Catholic bishops asked the Red Cross how they could help the refugees coming to New Zealand. They were asked to kit out the homes, and people have been giving from right across the region. House 3's goods have come from the Wairarapa, while the Whanganui community has provided for the house next door. And although toasters are important, for those who have given, they say it's about being a good neighbour and making sure the refugees feel welcome. The Anglican Bishop of Wellington, Justin Duckworth, says the generosity extends well beyond the church.
We hear stories of people going into shops saying, I need to buy a rice cooker, and they say, why do you want a rice cooker? And they say, because it's for the Syrian refugees. And then the shop says, I'll give it to you at cost. So it's not just the churches or the Islamic Centre, it's actually everyday New Zealanders and small businesses saying we want to get behind and say, refugees, you are welcome.
Bishop Duckworth says that shows the country's capacity and willingness to increase the annual refugee quota.
The question is not, the inconvenience it is for us. The question is what will happen if we don't do this? What will happen to the refugees who don't get to come here? And so for us to double the quota is just saying we would like to see, as opposed to 750 refugees, we'd like to see 1,500 a year, because for those extra 750, that will make a huge difference.
This month's refugee intake is the first of 4, and Bishop Duckworth says they're already preparing for the next one in April. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Michael Kropp.
The time is just over 1.5 minutes before 6. Feedback from Christchurch. I was part of the rescue effort, seconded to the NZDF. It's the bravery of those trapped which stays with me. Those that we could not save. And they knew it, but they were brave. Literally cutting people so we could get them out of the building to save them, being deep inside collapsed buildings in the aftershock. Every night before I go to sleep, I can still smell, hear, taste, feel those days, trying to save the living and give back to the families that died. A very personal piece of feedback. Thank you very much. And from somebody who is looking more at the present, the most disappointing aspect 5 years on is the rubble, broken cones, head-high weeds and the other rubbish that litters the inner city. This at a time when the city is so keen to get tourists back. For a relatively small cost, the inner city would look so much more attractive. Clean the place up. Yes, it was sad being back there today, 5 years on this day, and I think people who were talking at the service, we heard a lot of them in the first hour of Checkpoint tonight, and we're going to play some more of them after 6 o'clock, who thought they moved on, were very much back there today, very much remembering the sights and sounds and smells. A lot of people talking about the smell, a lot of people talking about the scent that they'd never ever come across before, because buildings don't normally collapse in large numbers in a major city like that. Very, very vivid recollections. We will have more after 6 o'clock. We will also hear from the Mayor, Bob Parker. The Mayor at the time, of course, it's Leanne Dalzell now, who will tell us about that day and what happened on it for him. Kia ora everyone, you are listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. We're on the radio, as Radio New Zealand has been for a very long time, but also screening live on Freeview Channel 50 and streaming live on the RNZ website. However you are doing so, thank you for joining us on this special day. Coming up in the next half hour, scenes of devastation revealed in Fiji as the death toll climbs. It is now officially 20, but expected to rise to more than that. And as I said, we have a very personal tour of the Christchurch CBD with former Mayor Sir Bob Parker 5 years on. But first, here's the news with Leilani Mamoisia.
Kia ora, good evening. At least 20 people are now known to have died in the most severe cyclone to hit Fiji in living memory. Aerial surveys of outlying islands show whole villages have been flattened. New Zealand and Australia have authorised the release of emergency aid held in the capital, Suva, which escaped the worst of the storm. The Prime Minister, Frank Bainimarama, says the devastation has left many people confused and stunned.
Homes have been destroyed, many low-lying areas have flooded, power lines have gone down all over the country, and roofing, iron, glass, live electric wires, and other hazardous materials pose serious threats to public safety. We are working hard to make your streets and communities secure once again, but that will take time.
Frank Bainimarama, Fiji's Prime Minister. A New Zealand tourist who was trapped inside her hotel in Fiji as Cyclone Winston hit says she was shocked by the devastation the following morning. The first flight out of Fiji arrived in Auckland this afternoon. Mohammed Hassan reports.
Tina Tabani says she spent a terrifying night with her family and all other hotel guests in a hotel boardroom, listening to debris flying and wind howling. In the morning, all she could see outside were downed trees and power lines, flattened structures, and corrugated iron everywhere. Fionn Davis, a backpacker from Wales, had to wait overnight at Nadi Airport for the first flight to Auckland. She says all communication had been cut off and no one knew what was happening. Wallace Franklin was at home on Nasoso Island when the cyclone hit. When morning broke, he says the community came together to clear out debris and check if everyone was okay. This is Mohammed Hassan.
Today, the New Zealand government released another $1.8 million to support non-governmental organisations working on the ground in Fiji. It follows emergency response funding of about $200,000 announced yesterday. A 41-year-old man has been charged with assaulting the Earthquake Recovery Minister, Jerry Brownlee, following the major earthquake memorial service in Christchurch today. Mr. Brownlee had a container of brown sludge poured over him at the service. The Labour Party leader, Andrew Little, who was nearby, said it was entirely inappropriate for someone to use the memorial service to protest against the Earthquake Recovery Minister. Mr. Little said he understood people were feeling angry, but that there were better ways to protest. Dignitaries and families of Japanese nationals who lost their lives in the earthquake are gathering at Christchurch's Transitional Cathedral to pay their respects. 185 people were killed when the earthquake struck shortly before 1 o'clock on February the 22nd, 2011. 28 of them were Japanese. Sally Murphy reports.
Members of the Christchurch Symphony Orchestra and the Canterbury Japanese Choir will join forces this evening to put on a concert commemorating the anniversary. Donations received at the service will go towards the construction of a bell tower at the Transitional Cathedral. There was a strong Japanese contingent at the civic memorial service in the Botanical Gardens this afternoon, including the Japanese Minister of Foreign Affairs. In Christchurch, Sally Murphy.
A magnitude 5 earthquake hit near Seddon this afternoon, but St John says it hasn't received any calls or reports of injuries from the area. GeoNet says the severe quake shortly after 4 p.m. was 8 kilometres deep, about 30 kilometres southeast of the Upper South Island town. The Marlborough District Council says people in Seddon have described it as a light to moderate shake. St John is urging people in Marlborough to check on their friends, family and neighbours, especially those who are ill, frail or alone. An Auckland businessman who threatened to contaminate infant formula with 1080 has rejected the Crown's argument that he did it for money. Name suppression has lapsed for Jeremy Hamish Kerr, who had earlier admitted 2 charges of attempted blackmail last December. In a police interview played at a disputed facts hearing this afternoon, Kerr said he'd be worse off if 1080 was banned.
It might help it in the short term, but it certainly wouldn't help it in the long term. Other products would have to come along. I would actually be worse off. That would open the door for lots of other products. There's zinc phosphide out there. That would be the logical replacement. That would really hurt me if that came out.
Jeremy Kerr. The hearing's set to continue tomorrow. A man died after 2 nurses failed to document and follow up on his bleeding wound, which turned out to be a malignant melanoma. A Health and Disability Commissioner's report shows a rural health nurse treated the man's wound, told him to tell his orthopaedic surgeon about the sore, but didn't officially refer him. Alexa Cook reports.
The Commissioner, Anthony Hill, says the rural health nurse didn't take responsibility for the wound that she treated, and she breached the code by not providing reasonable care and skill. Several months later, the man went back to hospital for a hip operation, and a registered nurse also noticed the wound but failed to monitor it or have it reviewed. It wasn't until the man told a physician about the sore that it was discovered to be a malignant melanoma, which he died from 14 months later. Mr Hill has recommended better communication, documentation and training for suspicious moles and skin lesions. This is Alexa Cook.
The New Zealand cricketers are struggling nearing the end of day 3 of their second test against Australia in Christchurch. The Black Caps are 116 for 4 in their second innings, still trailing by 19 runs. Captain Brendan McCullum made 25 in his last bat for New Zealand. Kane Williamson is unbeaten on 43. Meanwhile, it's 1-1 in the Women's Trans-Tasman one-day cricket series after Australia won Game 2 in Mount Maunganui by 8 wickets. New Zealand will have 3 shot putters competing at next month's World Indoor Athletics Championships in the United States. Val Adams, Tom Walsh and Jack O'Gill have all been selected, along with the 1500-metre runner Nick Willis. Athletics New Zealand selection convener Graham Seater says it's an encouraging sign in an Olympic year.
An interesting little bit of trivia without getting ahead of ourselves is there's never been an instance where one country has won both shot put titles at an Olympic Games. I'm not saying we will, I'm just saying that's indicative of how difficult it is to get 2 at this level at the same time. And we've certainly got one who's been at this level and a couple of others who seem to be on their way to that kind of level. So that's very exciting.
Val Adams is a 3-time world indoor champion. The New Zealand women's rugby sevens team has climbed to second equal in the World Series standings after their third-placed finish in round 2 in Sao Paulo. The New Zealanders beat the United States 28-0 in the playoff for third. And that's the news.
Remembering the 2011 Christchurch quake.
5 years on, there's an element of, seeing the new growth, seeing the regeneration.
Will Jerry Brownlee stay?
I'm not walking away from it by any manner of means, but if we're going to move from recovery to regeneration, that is a different phase entirely.
The job's not done yet.
Well, it's a pretty mixed progress, I suppose, and it depends on lots of individual stories.
Bringing it to you live, Susie Ferguson and Guyan Espiner, Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then after 9, news as it happens. In-depth conversations with world-leading experts and the latest trends you need to know about. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And Met Service weather to midnight, Northland to Taranaki. In the central high country, fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers. Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty mainly fine. A few drizzle patches tomorrow morning. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay fine spells, isolated late afternoon or evening showers tomorrow. Whanganui to Wellington also Wairarapa fine today. Cloudy periods tomorrow with a few morning showers about Whanganui and Manawatu. Bulla to Fiordland, cloudy with a patchy drizzle tomorrow, turning to rain in Fiordland later. The Kaikoura coast and Canterbury, areas of cloud with a few showers tomorrow, clearing from the south in the afternoon. Remaining South Island areas, mostly fine weather, a few showers developing about coastal Southland tomorrow evening. Chatham Islands, a few showers developing tomorrow evening, and it's 6:09.
Thank you very much indeed, Leilani. More coming up from Christchurch and Fiji. Let's start in Fiji. Passengers on the first flight to New Zealand after Cyclone Winston struck there have described the scenes of devastation. Wind gusts exceeding 300 km, destroyed homes, crops and infrastructure in many areas, and 20 deaths have been confirmed so far. Mohammed Hassan spoke to people after their flight landed at Auckland Airport this afternoon.
Exhausted but relieved to be home. Some reunited with family, some returning with their children, others having just left parents behind amid the destruction. Fionn Davis, a backpacker from Wales, had to wait overnight at Nadi Airport for the first flight to Auckland. She says there was chaos the night before and it was difficult to know what was happening.
Just no one knew what was going on and we were just stuck inside and where we were staying, no electric, no phones, no contact with no one.
Whereabouts in Fiji were you at the time?
Nadi, in Smuggler's Cove.
What could you see from inside?
Just wind and rain, and then they shut us out, and then no one was allowed to go to their rooms or anything.
Yeah.
So we're just stuck inside there.
Wallace Franklin was at home on Nassau Island when the cyclone hit.
It was pretty hectic, strong as wind and stuff, breaking trees and all.
Yeah.
Just like palm trees getting snapped and all.
The morning after, he went out to assess the damage.
All the neighborhood started like cleaning up and shit. Went around the neighborhood to see if anyone needed help and all. And yeah, some driveways were blocked by like trees and stuff. So we had to clean that up as well.
Mohammed Nadim says his parents' house was lucky to be still standing in the morning, but some weren't so lucky.
It was pretty bad. Like some of the houses went blown out. I was happy my house was all good.
Tina Tabani was staying at the Novotel just outside Nadi Airport. She says it was hard to take in just how much damage Cyclone Winston caused.
That was, devastation. That was horrible. Yeah.
What can you see?
Just lots of trees down, lots of power lines down, just lots of total sort of flattened debris, corrugated iron, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So. Did you see anyone injured or anything like that?
Nobody injured. Thank goodness, that was all good. But just devastation, really.
She says she just spent a terrifying night with her family and other hotel guests, huddled in the boardroom, listening to debris flying and wind howling. For Checkpoint, Mohammed Hassan.
Obviously, there are lots of aid agencies working in Fiji. One of them is Tear Fund, and they're desperately trying to ensure aid gets to the people who need it as quickly as possible. A short time ago, I spoke to their communications officer, John Watson, in Lautoka, and asked him what he was seeing there.
Well, we're in the Lovu settlement in Lautoka, which is it's an informal settlement, which means these people were poor and vulnerable to begin with, without access to government services like power or water. Some houses have been almost completely destroyed, certainly not in a livable condition. All of them have experienced probably up to 1 metre or even a bit higher flood gone through all of their houses. And the river is up really high. There are children playing in it, and I'm not sure exactly how safe it is. So while all of the houses here haven't been flattened, some of them have been destroyed and all of them damaged by the flood.
John, when is the aid turning up? When will the first aid get in there?
It's a good question. Well, it normally takes a couple of days for government and humanitarian organisations to form a coordinated response, to plan what the response will be, because they don't want a hodgepodge response. So we're probably looking at least another day or two until aid starts arriving.
And John, I feel like people were a bit caught out by Cyclone Winston because it kept changing its direction. I mean, 2 or 3 days ago, we were preparing for it to smash North Tonga up. Now, here you are standing in Fiji. So is it simply also that the logistics of getting aid there might be slightly slower than usual?
Yes. Well, we've seen with Cyclone Winston, because of the El Nino and the warmer than usual conditions in the Pacific Ocean, they're right for cyclones to last longer and be stronger, and cyclones are unpredictable at the best of times. So we were monitoring the cyclone as it was moving past Tonga and then towards Fiji. So we did have a bit of warning. And our partners, Tier Fund's partners on the ground, were helping to prepare people, helping to board up windows and get them into evacuation shelters. So there was a bit of time to warn people. But in terms of aid, it's always takes days around planning. So that's what we're looking at right now.
And there's only so much you can do in subsistence communities like those because they really do get destroyed by these events. What is the aid you need most urgently in there?
Well, talking to the people in this community, and it'll be the same for a lot of communities that have been affected, the immediate needs are water. So they normally collect rainwater here to drink, but all of the rainwater, the water they did have was destroyed by the flood or blown away. So water is really an urgent need here.
John Watson from Tier Fund. The time is 60 minutes past 6. Coming up on World Watch at 6:30 with John Greaves. Islamic State claims responsibility for mass explosions in Syria, and doctors in Bangkok closely monitoring the condition of the country's 88-year-old king. We're going to leave Fiji and go back to Christchurch. Memorial service there today, of course, as people remembered the lives lost and those permanently changed, the lives disrupted, and the way the city of Christchurch changed in an instant 5 years ago today. Our reporter Rachel Graham was there.
About 1,500 people streamed into the Botanic Gardens to take part in the civic memorial service. After song and prayer, the 10-minute-long list, naming all 185 people who lost their lives 5 years ago today, was read out.
From the United States of America, Rachel Elizabeth Conley.
Of New Zealand, Maysoon, Maddie, Abbas, Hussam, Sabia, Al-Ani, Jane.
Christchurch resident Terry Green says she attended because it's important to show those that have lost so much that they haven't been forgotten.
You know, as I stand here listening to the names being read out, I think how dreadful. What if my son's name was read out? You know, and the only thing that can support you is the fact that everybody still cares, and we do. We still care for those people who lost other people and all those people who are still struggling, and we have to remember that because Christchurch isn't over yet. It's not finished. I'm back in my house, but many people are not. We mustn't forget them.
Veronica McGrogan says she found the ceremony deeply moving.
And I think it's just gives you just a time to sort of think about everybody and everyone who's been affected and lost family members and how life has changed for them. It was very moving, especially when they read out the names, and there's just so many of them.
Barbara Sampson says her home and loved ones weren't affected by the earthquakes, but she wanted to stand with those who were.
This is something that we've all experienced, and even though we live in a part that wasn't badly damaged, yet for the sake of the whole city I came. It's a sign of being together at a time like this, because there are still many people who are deeply affected by it all.
After the service, people wandered down to the Avon River to place flowers in the water and take time to reflect and remember. Michelle Whittaker helped organise the Rivers of Flowers event, and she says thousands of people took part in 20 locations along the river.
People want to just gather and be at this time. Some people want to chat, some people want to make some speeches, which they can, and sing songs, and others just want to be with other people, but just quietly reflect. So it's very moving, but very caring and supportive.
The Christchurch Mayor, Leanne Dalzell, says today Christchurch remembered what it has lost, but it's also an opportunity to look forward.
From disaster, there always comes opportunity, and I think of some of the things that are happening in the transitional space. I think that sort of energy and innovation and creativity, that's going to be a lot about the future of Christchurch, and so I think it can be very exciting as well.
Ms Dalzell says today's service was a special one as it marks the end of an era. She says the families of those who died and were badly injured, who make up the Earthquake Families Trust, have asked to take control of the memorial event in the future. She says next year the Trust will manage the event at the new Earthquake Memorial, which is currently under construction in the central city by the Avon River. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Rachel Graham.
5 years ago, Christchurch's mayor was Bob Parker. He remembers being hurled through the air when the quake hit, breaking ribs as he fell, and trying to phone the Prime Minister in the chaos. We asked Sir Bob now to visit his day, revisit that day. He began with our camera operator, Alexander Robertson, outside the council building.
It was 12:51 on a pretty balmy, late summer's Canterbury afternoon, and most of the civil defence team leaders and the team boss and many of the other emergency services in the city were relaxed enough to head up to Wellington for a debrief. And I'd slipped out between meetings onto the mayor's balcony to have a cup of tea and a sandwich, check out some appointments and so on, when suddenly, just out of nowhere, all hell absolutely broke loose. It was the most violent explosion of energy that I've ever personally experienced. It threw me in the air, crashed me on the ground. I couldn't stand, nobody could, and immediately the shaking and the noise stopped. I had a perfect view across the city of what was obviously going to be a scene of massive destruction. It was clearly a huge quake. I went into the building, there were scenes of chaos, equipment tipped over, my office, everything was piled up in the middle, scrabbled around to find my phone. I knew I'd need that. Waited until most of the staff got out. There were injuries, broken glass, and a lot of very shocked people. Made my way down the stairway and emerged here on the street, Hereford Street, outside the council building, and across the other side of the road where the old police station used to stand, there were 1,000 or more staff just lined up. The road was buckled, water was gushing out of cracks, sirens were going everywhere, and we were in the midst of what was like a war, in a sense. It was a war zone, transformed in 25 seconds from normality to absolute chaos. The roads blocked within seconds. People were running out of the city. They were talking about building collapse and injury. And we knew that we just had to make some quick decisions and get moving. So the first decision was really that 10-metre decision. Who's around me? Who can I grab? Who can we get together to get across to the place we would need to move into, which was the art gallery, which we'd set up previously as an emergency operations centre for civil defence. We still didn't know how big the quake was. We didn't know where the epicentre was. We found out later that we were essentially virtually standing on the epicentre. And what would unfold over the next 24 hours was something beyond any of our own vivid imaginations.
Oh my gosh.
Oh dear.
After the engineers had checked out the Christchurch City Art Gallery, we were able to move it here. We'd already been here in September and used it as our emergency operations headquarters. So we were familiar with the place. It didn't take us long to set it up. We had a problem in that many of our civil defence people across the city were, of course, fighting their own personal battles at that point, but it was extraordinary how many staff got in here quickly and enabled us to set up the lines of communication with all of the other emergency operations centres that were being set up simultaneously. It's just extraordinary, the response of the police, of the hospitals, the fire service. And in Christchurch we had based in the city an urban search and rescue team. They'd been badly hit at their headquarters, but they were sorting themselves out, and there were all of these independent activities taking place across the city, and many ordinary individuals just doing extraordinary things as we all sought as a community to work with each other and to help each other in what was obviously a desperate situation. And over the coming hours we declared the state of emergency in the city, and we began to pull together with our lines of communication the full picture of what had happened here. And we knew very early on that there were significant numbers of casualties. We knew from the buildings that had collapsed nearby, and the reports that were coming in from streets in the immediate vicinity of this building and the council building that people had died and that many were trapped in buildings. And there were fires starting in some areas. We had to sit down really and, having drawn up that picture, begin to rationalise some way forward, just making those first decisions in order to get the processes of the rescue operation underway. We had the urban search and rescue teams by now coming in from around the country. The Aussies had been mobilised. I've been able to text the Prime Minister, and it was very clear that we would need significant international help in those early days as we sought to rescue as many people as we could from the collapsed buildings and the verandas that had fallen. And we started to get the figures coming in. This is actually a copy of one of our first situation reports that we put together that evening here in the Christchurch Art Gallery. And it's pretty sober reading, going back and remembering the reports that were coming in, the number of casualties, the fact that we had hundreds, thousands of tourists in the city, evacuated hotels. We had to feed people, house people, and we had to encourage people to recognise that we wouldn't be able to get everywhere that we needed to get in those first 12, even 24 hours, that people were going to be their own civil defence force.
This one.
So I'm literally standing in the middle of what was one of the older central city blocks of Christchurch, covered with buildings. And by the time I reached here in the early part of the evening, this was a scene of utter and absolute chaos. That's Manchester Street just over there. Around here, people were trapped in buildings. The PGC building just across the Avon River in the distance to the north of us. Many people trapped in there. In fact, Anne Bodkin was the last person that we were able to rescue alive from that about 24 hours after the quake hit us on the 22nd. And beyond that, tragically, we were unable to recover anybody else that was still alive and trapped in the rubble. And then directly over here, the site of the CTV building. And when I arrived down here that evening, there was smoke rising from the ruins of the building. It was the scene of absolutely frantic rescue operations. Relatives were standing over on Latimer Square, and you can imagine the distraught state they were in. And that was a scene that was being repeated all over the city, not just in the central city, around the rock faces of Sumner on the hills where we'd lost people, and of course the terrible liquefaction in the east of the city that would make people's lives a misery for so long. As we stood here that evening in the air, we had rescue teams coming from Australia. The Aussies were first to respond, of course, and they were absolutely brilliant. We had other teams coming in from China, from Taiwan. We had Singaporean military people on exercise in the city. They came in to help us with 3 roadblocks up around the city. We had guys from the States, guys from the UK. It was an extraordinarily international response, and Latimer Square was like the United Nations for a while. We had emergency triage and some of the other things that we'd rather forget about set up in those areas over there. And it's just unbelievable now to be standing in a patch of grass in the middle of what was a scene of absolute and utter destruction, and it still brings back so many painful memories for people. This is still very much alive for everybody. So as dusk fell on that evening of the 22nd, I got my first chance to really get outside of the EOC. I knew that we had a major situation just down the road from here at the CTV building and at the PGC building, and right throughout this area there were people trapped. The cathedral was a big worry. There'd been a lot of tourists in there, and we weren't sure how many people were trapped in there, and we knew it was going to be a hell of a difficult job to get inside. As it turned out, amazingly, you might say miraculously, nobody perished in the cathedral. And it sits there today, 5 years later, as a sad memento of, I guess, inaction. And it does break my heart. I did propose that it shouldn't be rebuilt. This is probably a little contentious. My view was that we should never rebuild it, but that rather we should, in a very creative architectural way, deconstruct parts of it, make it safe for services, and encase it as a semi-ruin, but a functioning one, inside an elegant glass case. And my reason for this is that in 3 generations, essentially there'll only be photographs and videos and sound bites of the times that we went through, where we would have painted over and papered over all of the cracks. And in a way, we should never forget what happened here, because it happened before. And if we make it all go away, I have a terrible feeling that future generations will forget that we live on the edge of these tectonic plates and how they shaped our lives here on that dreadful day, on the 22nd of February 2011. This could be a living, working memorial to the ordinary people, to the survivors in this city who deserve as much recognition as anybody else.
Bob Parker, who was Mayor, ending our special Checkpoint program 5 years on. In the past 5 years, the people of Christchurch have told their stories to journalists like me with incredible generosity and dignity. On behalf of everyone who has had the privilege of working in Christchurch during that time, thank you, and thank you for listening tonight. Apologies to John Grieve, we're a little bit late, but that is Checkpoint for this evening.
Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm John Greaves. Tonight, support for Islamic State is on the rise in Indonesia. At least 10 people are dead after clashes in India. And yet another shooting rampage in the United States. Those stories and more in World Watch PM. But first, a raw New Zealand